This morning we're going to begin chapter 10 of Mark as we get to some more of Jesus' teachings. And beginning in verse 1 of chapter 10, it says, "He set out from there and went to the region of Judea across the Jordan. Then crowds converged on him again, and as was his custom, he taught them again. Some Pharisees came to test him, asking, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?' He replied to them, 'What did Moses command you?' They said, 'Moses permitted us to write divorce papers and send her away.' But Jesus told them, 'He wrote this command for you because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.' When they were in the house again, the disciples questioned him about this matter. He said to them, 'Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. Also, if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery.'" So when it comes to relationships, we understand the importance of them, primarily because Christianity is itself a relationship. It's about our relationship with Jesus. It's our relationship with God the Father through God the Son, and it's the presence of God the Holy Spirit with us. So it's very relational. And as part of the teachings of the Bible, we realize that relationship is reflected in the relationships that we have with others. Marriage being the one of the best illustrations of our relationship with God, and it helps us understand our relationship with God. And so we get here, and Jesus is talking about this relationship of marriage, but he's also addressing the question of divorce, which in our society is both a very contentious and hot topic, while also being a very kind of common topic. I mean, more than half of marriages end in divorce in the United States, and so that leaves us, wondering a number of things. And when we get to this part where Jesus talks about divorce, we come to some realizations that lead us to the conclusion that perhaps society's understanding of marriage is flawed. If half of them are ending in divorce, then perhaps there's a basic fundamental flaw somewhere. And that fundamental flaw would be, I think, a complete misunderstanding of what marriage is. If you're going to have a marriage, you have to somehow have some concept of what that is. It's if you've ever, and I realize it's not Christmas time, but it brings to mind Shrek the Halls, where Shrek the ogre has married Fiona. It's their first December that they've been married, and Donkey tells Shrek about Christmas, and all of a sudden Shrek's like, I have to make a Christmas. And how do you make a Christmas? He doesn't even know what it is, and that's part of the problem. Is he goes, I don't even know what it is. And I think that's how we approach marriage in our societies. A lot of people, they get married, but they have no idea what a marriage is. I don't even know if they know what they are trying to do. I don't think that there's enough intentional thought given to what is this for people to answer it, and so more than half of them fail. And so when we look at what Jesus is saying here, he kind of goes against a lot of our cultural understanding, but he clarifies for us what marriage is. And I think that in order to have a strong marriage, in order for marriages to last, in order for relationships to withstand, we have to have an understanding of what they are. What are some of the basic foundational principles governing these relationships? And so when it comes to marriage, there's a few things that stand right out in these verses from what Jesus is saying. And first and foremost is that marriage is from God. So this whole thing comes from the Pharisees, who are religious leaders, coming and asking Jesus, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And they're trying to test him. They're not actually interested in the answer. They're trying to create questions that are going to be almost impossible for Jesus to answer. Because the reality is that in the Jewish culture of the first century, and really going all the way back to the time of Moses, the simple answer to that, yes, it is lawful. It is permitted. However, in the Jewish culture, going all the way back, a large number of the Jewish people and the Pharisees themselves frowned upon marriage. And by frowned, I mean, like, seriously did not think that it was okay. So it's one of those things, well, yeah, you can do it, but it's not the right thing to do. You're permitted to do it, but you shouldn't do it. And so they're going to try to trip Jesus up because, they I don't know, they've been around long enough that they should know that he's not going to just answer these yes-no questions with yes-no. He's way smarter than that. But they keep trying, probably because this is the only way they can think of to get at him. But he responds by, of course, what did Moses command you? And they said, yes, he let us write a divorce paper and send her away. But then he says, yes, he wrote this because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning of creation, God, and then he quotes from Genesis, made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. All of this is from God. The whole marriage idea came from God. You go all the way back to Genesis. Chapter 1 gives us the creation account. Chapter 2 gives us kind of another look at creation and delves into some things, including the creation of Adam and the whole idea that God brought all the animals to Adam, but there wasn't a suitable helper for him, a suitable companion for him. And so then he created Eve. So in the beginning, God created the whole relationship, and he did so in a way that reveals to Adam his need for a relationship like this. And so the whole marriage concept comes from God. So what that means for us is, number one, we can't redefine marriage. It's not up to us to define marriage. It's not up to the government to define what marriage is. It's not up to me to define what a marriage is. God's already done that. God has already established what exactly a marriage relationship is. In the creation of a man and a woman and bringing them together so that they can become one, that is God's design. And it's not just a design. That's what the whole thing is. So there are many different types of relationships we can have, right? So not just because a man and a woman can have a relationship that's not a marriage. It's not even romantic. They can have friendships, they can have acquaintances, there's all kinds of different relationships that we could categorize. But when it comes to marriage, God has very clearly already decided what that is. He's the one that established it. He's the one that instituted it, started it, showed Adam and Eve what it was. And so we have to be careful in this. And in our society, everything's up for debate. Everything's up for redefinition because it's too archaic. But it's kind of like, well, sure, fine. Well, I mean, you're sitting around the dining room table and you decide, well, you know what? I don't want to call this a table anymore. I want to call this a submarine because I like submarines. I like the sound of submarine. Or you know what, this table holds our food, but I don't think that the purpose of this table is to hold our food. I think the purpose of this table is so that we can surf on waves or go snowboarding down the mountainside. I mean, no, it's a table, and it does what it does. You want to do the other things. There are other things for that, and all of this is. Like I say, it's hotly debated in our society because a lot of people look at what the Bible has to say about marriage and the marriage relationship, and there's a lot of difficulties in that, including this next point, which is marriage is meant to last. It comes from God, and it's meant to last. It's not meant to be for as long as I feel like it. And that's where I think most of our society trips up on this. It's meant to last. I think people go into it thinking it's going to last, and then after a while, the newness wears off, the emotions wear off, and you've thought that the emotion was what the marriage was all about, and you thought that emotion was what it was going to be forever. And when you realize it's not, it doesn't always feel that way, then you're like, well, I'm done. Obviously, this just wasn't meant to be. We're just going to go our separate ways, and the problem is it's meant to last. Jesus said, the two are no longer two, but one. They've been joined together, and not just in some allegorical way, but in a very real way. They've been put together and fastened together. And what God has joined together, let no one separate. That's what Jesus says. So it's meant to last. It is meant to. So why did Moses permit a certificate of divorce? Well, Jesus said it's because of the hardness of your heart. And if you look back into the historical context and whatnot, a picture begins to emerge of, men would marry a woman and then get tired of her. And the tendency in the ancient world would be just kick her out, send her on her way. Now, there's two problems with this. Number one, for the woman in the ancient world, there was very little she could do for herself. There was very little employment opportunity. It wasn't impossible. Don't misunderstand. There was possibilities, but it was a whole lot harder back then, and the opportunities were extremely limited. So, a woman who got kicked out, the chances are she was going to struggle the rest of her life, and quite possibly find herself in a place where she's starving. And so it's very difficult, very difficult. The flip side of that too is he kicks her out and then decides, well, you know what, I want her back, and goes and gets her back. And so her life is completely unpredictable. She doesn't know what's going to happen, and she doesn't know what this guy's going to do, and he kicks her out. She's not necessarily free of him. He can come back. And so the writing of the certificate would be given to the woman saying, you're free, go away. And that certificate protected her from going back to the guy that kicked her out. She doesn't have to. As a matter of fact, she shouldn't. Then considering, a lot of those types of situations, the guy probably wasn't worth going back to anyway. It's good. It's good that there was a certificate that said, nope. You guys determined that this isn't going to work, so no. And so it wasn't meant to make divorce easy. It was meant to be a type of protection, which is kind of our last point here, is marriage is meant to protect. Who does it protect? It really protects everybody. In the context of the ancient world, and even in Jesus' day, a lot of what Jesus is saying protected the woman because she was the one that needed the protection more than the man. And the man really was a little freer in a lot of ways than a woman, as far as, he walks away or she walks away, either one of them walks away from the marriage, he's still got his income, he's still got a lot of the property, possession and whatnot. His rights were a little stronger and a little firmer than hers. And so a lot of this was meant to protect the woman from just being cast away because the man didn't like her. And there's this very interesting thing. And we miss it in the Western world because our minds don't work this way. And so we read over this and we don't even see that it's there. But in verse 11, he says, whoever divorces a wife and marries another commits adultery against her. Now, what's so remarkable about that is in the ancient world, it was impossible to commit adultery against the woman. The woman can commit adultery against the husband. He's the victim. But if he goes and does things he shouldn't do, in the ancient world, that was just normal. That's just what guys do, you know. And so she couldn't be considered a victim of this. What Jesus is doing is saying, no, both parties in the marriage are equally valuable. Both parties have equal rights. Both parties are human beings, beloved children of God. And so, yes, you do something against her, you better believe you are sinning against her. And so this would have been kind of a revolutionary thought for a lot of these people. A very freeing thought for women, possibly a very scary thought for some of the guys standing around there listening to this. Realizing that, no, you're not totally free to do whatever you want while she is totally constrained in this. No. This is a promise that you guys have made, that you're going to come together, you become one, and in that oneness you're going to stay together, because if you come apart, then you're no longer a whole person. Because remember, two became one. So now if there's a divorce, the two people can't all of a sudden become two separate entities again. In some sense, a part of them gets torn apart. Which is why in the book of Malachi, the prophet states God hates divorce. And you look at our society, you know, if half the people, more than half the people are running around divorced, I mean, you got to be careful with that, because you don't want to say God hates people who get divorced. No, he hates divorce. Anybody who's been through divorce probably understands exactly why. They probably have a better idea than the rest of us as to why God would hate it, because it's a horrible, painful, terrible experience. No matter if it's necessary, right? It's still a horrible, terrible, painful experience that humans are not meant to go through. We're not meant to go through that kind of a process of a dissolving of a relationship like that. Now it happens. And don't misconstrue what Jesus is saying to say that you can't ever get a divorce, because there are always extenuating circumstances. There's always some sort of exception. In the other accounts of Jesus giving this teaching, the gospel writers record that he said, if a man divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness, right? So there's that, and then in Corinthians, I believe it is, I think it's 1 Corinthians, Paul's writing about believers and unbelievers, and if one of the couple, the husband or the wife, becomes a Christian, starts following Jesus, and the other does not, and the one who doesn't follow Jesus wants to leave the marriage, then Paul says let him. It's permissible. So it's not like it's 100% every divorce is absolutely wrong. Every divorce is painful, and so in that sense, there's a sense of wrongness to it, but not every divorce is wrong, because in a fallen world like this, sometimes these things must take place. In our society, unfortunately, though, we take this to the extreme, where we have these no-fault divorces, where it's nobody's fault. Nobody did anything bad. Nobody's a really bad person here. We just don't want to be together anymore. Well, for Jesus, that wouldn't hold up. That doesn't measure up. And one of the problems with that is the fact that when you get married, you make these promises to one another, and most people still use similar, verbiage of for better, for worse, and for richer, for poorer, sickness and health, and we say it sounds great, and it makes you look noble standing up there making these promises. But then as soon as the better wears off and a worse part comes along, and you're done, and it's like, but you promised. And so there is a sense in which you got some moral issues going on here. Again, there are circumstances that where you either can't escape it, and sometimes you probably shouldn't escape dissolving a relationship. I don't think Jesus is teaching what some pastors today teach, and that's, if a woman's in an abusive relationship, she has to stay there because that's what she's supposed to do, because marriage is good, divorce is bad. And divorce is bad, but I mean, so is a bad abusive relationship. I mean, you can't hold one up over the other and say, well, I mean, you got to endure this, because I don't find enough biblical evidence. And when I look at what Jesus taught and the way he did it, I don't think he would tell a woman, don't stay in an abusive relationship. It's quite the opposite. As a matter of fact, his teaching is meant to protect the woman from such things. And in our day and time, protect both sides, because there are occasions, it's not as common, but there are occasions, and from my time in law enforcement, I can tell you, there are occasions where the woman is the abuser. She can be abusive. And so what do you do? What do you do with these things? And the reality is, this leads us to, if marriage is from God, it's meant to last, and it's meant to protect, then we need to be a lot more careful when entering into marriage. And we need to make some very clear decisions about who we're going to marry, what the marriage is going to be like, and all this. You really should work those things out before you get married. You shouldn't just jump into this. And then work it out as best you can. And if you get to the point where you just don't, then don't just jump ship necessarily. Oh, absolutely. Don't ever misunderstand anything here, okay? There are times where a separation in geographical space might be a good thing. You don't have to be in their physical presence necessarily. Sometimes a separation can be a good thing, so that you can get help, and so that you can get guidance, and so that you can get good solid counsel on what to do. If you feel like your marriage is falling apart, seek that out. Do what you can to hold it together, and if it falls apart, then you're going to unfortunately see why it is that God doesn't like divorces. He doesn't like people going through those things. But the long and the short of it is that the reason that marriage was given to us by God, and the reason that it's meant to last, and the reason that it's meant to be a protective relationship where each one is protecting each other, is because this is supposed to be a reflection of our relationship with God. And since God is spirit and we are physical, and we don't see God with our physical eyes, marriage is meant to be that place where we experience what our relationship with God is. It's meant to be that place where we experience what it means to be unconditionally loved. It's where we also learn how to unconditionally love. It's where we learn how to protect and be protected by somebody. It's where we learn how it is that all of my imperfections don't drive away the most important relationship in life. And when we're experiencing that, then we can begin to see how it is that we can have a relationship with a perfect God when we're not perfect. That's when we can begin to realize just how wonderful God's love for us is, in that no matter how we sin against him, he still loves us, he forgives us, and he doesn't drive us away. This is part of the, from my Baptist background, I believe that once you're saved, once you accept Jesus, and once you become part of his family, you're never kicked out. You don't lose your salvation. And how can we be assured of that? How can we know that? Well, the Bible teaches it, but then marriage is the illustration that helps us gain a a point of reference for understanding that kind of love and that kind of relationship. And so really, this really is really all about God and understanding God. And when we realize that marriage isn't just about us, we're not the center of it all, then we begin to understand why it is that Jesus said, "What God joined together, let no man separate." Don't treat this flippantly. Don't treat marriage as if it's just a thing of convenience. Or we're going to be married until I feel like not being married anymore. Or I'm going to be married to you until I find the next best thing that comes along. Or I'm going to be married to you as long as you make me happy, or as long as you make me feel good, or as long as I have warm fuzzies. If it's a selfish marriage, it's going to dissolve. It's going to fall apart, because no two humans are going to be able to stay together for a long term if both of them are thinking about themselves. But once you get the focus off yourself, it becomes more manageable, more doable. And once you get the focus on God, then you begin to really understand what marriage is all about. And that's when you become strong in your marriage. That's how marriages stay strong, is when they have the right focus. And I believe that the strongest marriages are the ones that are focused on God. Not saying that, because the world is full of examples of individuals who aren't necessarily Christian, but they got married and they stayed together. But they're still missing that vital piece, that component of it all, that if you focus on God, that's where you're going to find the richest, fullest marriage possible. And now what do we do with the single people? I feel like you can't just go through all this and then close out, because it's all been about marriage. What about single people? The Bible is very clear. It's okay to be single. As a matter of fact, Jesus himself told his disciples, it's definitely okay to be single. Jesus was single. The long and the short of it is that marriage is the foundational relationship upon which societies are built. And marriage is one of the clearest examples of human relationship. But you don't have to be married to understand what marriage is. You don't have to be married to understand what divorce is. You don't have to be married to understand what Jesus is teaching here, especially when you realize this is about the reflecting on God's relationship with us, because you can still look at a marriage and get this lesson. You can learn from others while walking the path of singleness. Being single isn't a bad thing, and it's not a wrong thing, and a marriage isn't a better thing than singleness if that's what God has called you to do. As a matter of fact, perhaps that's why there are so many divorces, is there's a lot of people getting married that don't need to be getting married. I don't know. It's a possibility. So to single people, I would say, take it as the example it's meant to be. Take it as the illustration it's meant to be. Take it as the reality is that every relationship that we have really should, in some respect, reflect what it's like to relate with God. And we have an opportunity in every relationship to both become like God and also to experience what it's like to receive the gift of love and friendship and acceptance from God. And so we've got these ideas, and this is where the Pharisees, I think, got tripped up too, is too many of us look at our relationships as if they are A, centered around us, and B, as if they're just human things. And they're not. They're really meant to help us understand God better and help us relate to God better, and to free us from these feelings of guilt at our imperfection, and to realize you can have a relationship with God. That's the whole reason Jesus came, is to cleanse the impurity and the imperfection so that you can relate with God, because he wants to have a relationship with you. And so that's why we need to be careful with our relationships in this life, is because how we treat them is how we're going to see and treat our relationship with God. And so in the end, the idea here is, let's keep our focus on Jesus. Let's keep our focus on God. And let's live in a way that helps us become more like Him and understand Him better. Because that is, I believe, really what is at the heart of what Jesus is saying. And that's why the Pharisees' question was the wrong question, and it was based on a wrong thought process, because they were looking at marriage in the wrong way. And they were looking at all of their relationships in the wrong way. This is about, how do we reflect God, and how do we receive from others in a way that helps us understand God? And how do we put all of our relationships in that perspective, so that God is at the center of them all, so that in the end we understand Him better and we represent Him on this earth better. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we come before You today, and we thank You for this day. We thank You for the opportunity to once again gather together to worship You and to learn from Your word. And we just pray, Father, that You would continue to guide us and direct us and help us to become more like You in all of our relationships, whether it's marriage or friendships or relationships with our coworkers. I just pray, Lord, that in all ways we would put You at the center of all of these relationships, and realize that You are the essential component to all of them. So help us to become more like You, and help us to learn more about You as we interact with other people. Help us to experience what it's like to be accepted even when we're imperfect, and help us to see what it's like to love others when they're imperfect. Help us to grow in these things so that we become more like You and reflect You in Your ways and Your character to those around us. We thank You and we praise You in Jesus' name. Amen.